Good morning, Sister Jeanne. Sister Jeanne O'Loughlin.
Good morning.
I'm a bit intimidated. And Ashley, you better be intimidated too, because, Jeanne, you've been interviewed by NBC and CBS and CNN and probably even Fox.
ABC.
ABC. Especially at the time of the Elian Gonzalez.
Yes, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
That was both a privilege and a disaster. But I don't know whether you want me to speak.
He was a young Cuban, wasn't he?
Yes, he was a young Cuban who was caught in a political turmoil between the U.S. and Cuba. And Janet Reno was a very good friend of mine. And she asked me if I would house the grandmothers because of the political situation. They would be safe, and they would bring the child there. But while they were there, it was a very, very terrible experience in our home. The INS and various CIA or whomever were there, and it was very difficult because when they talked about the woman, the mother of the child, who died en route, they mocked her. And in the mocking of that woman, in my mind, they mocked every woman that had come across those waters with their children seeking freedom. And it was at that moment that I knew that it was wrong to send him back without first honoring the mother's wishes, that the child be given a hearing. And that became a terribly, terribly awkward, horrible situation.
Conflict, yes, indeed.
And I received death threats and all kinds of things. But for me, I did not understand at the time that the president had already made a deal with Cuba, with Castro, and the child was exchanged between them. It was all settled.
And it was President
Clinton. My friend Bill.
Your friend Bill.
My friend Bill, who wore Barry University T-shirt on his run. But he later on has said that he was sorry that he put me in a position like that.
Well, Jeanne, I'm aware that as fifth president of Barry University, you spent 23 beautiful years there, and I sincerely believe they're documented in a wonderful way. I'd like to know about your life before you were 16.
Oh, dear. Well, my mother died when I was just turning 6, and she had had a new baby, actually 3 days after my 6th birthday, and she never came home from the hospital. And my dad was one of these old Irish dads, and he was a good man. And one time I do have the memory of him putting us in the car and taking us to this hospital where he pointed to a window. We were to look up at the window. And he put us on the roof of the car, and we saw in the window a man holding a woman. That was my mother, and she was waving goodbye.
Oh.
And that was my last memory, and perhaps one of the few memories I have of this woman. But
she must have been very young.
She was 29.
Oh, my.
And she had only finished 8th grade because they were from a farm, actually not too far from Adrian, near Battle Creek and that Grand Rapids and so on. And her mother had died in the flu epidemic and left children. And the father was incapacitated. So she had to quit school, and she and her brother, who was just about 16 or so, they tried to run the farm. And the story goes that my dad went one day told his mother he was going to go propose to Mary Croak. And when he went and asked her to marry him when she was about 21, she said, if you marry me, you have to take John and Jim and Helen and Edna. And he made the deal. And he moved them.
Is that her brothers and sisters?
That was the whole brothers and sisters. And he moved them all to Detroit. And he put John and Edna and Helen into St. Mary's of Redford. And actually, St. Mary's of Redford was just getting started. And John was one of the first graduates of St. Mary's of Redford.
Oh, my.
So the farm kids got through school, and he put my Aunt Edna through teaching college.
Where did you go to attend grade school?
Well, in grade school, I should just tie that family. My dad, later on, they all married and left, and my dad was left with the four. My brother, Bernie, was a little over a year older than I. My sister Pat was the eldest, and she was 3 years older. And then the baby, Mary, was only 2 weeks. But my aunt stayed with us for a while until she married. And so from then on, we say my dad drug us up. And so the sisters, the nuns, the Adrian Dominicans, who, oh my God, I loved them. They came to St. Scholastica's. And St. Scholastica's at the time was a very small, almost a rural church. And Father Boniface Lucci
Oh, yes.
was the pastor at the time. And they tell me that my mother would take him food and would have him over the house every week for a decent meal. And they even said he had to shoot out the front door. He would shoot pigeons or something. But so it was not, St. Scholastica's was not what it was in later years. But it was a small school, and the nuns loved us. And so my brother, my sister, and I went to St. Scholastica's. And when Mary was old enough, she went there. But they let us bring her to school before she was old enough to go to school. And she would sit with Sister Immaculata, Lord rest her soul, while she gave music lessons. And so it was my job to really bring Mary back and forth to school. And every night we would stop at the statue of the Blessed Mother, and she became our mother. And I remember that little wooden church, and Our Lady of Grace was there, and her arms outstretched had been outstretched in my life since those years, sitting in front of her after school and telling her about the day. So my early years were not really happy years. They were years of I wonder if tomorrow what will bring. I wonder if things will be okay. And yet I have some happy memories of Christmas. I have some happy memories of visiting aunts. I have some happy memories of brotherly and sisterly love. But it was shortly after the Depression. And my dad worked at Dodge for 40-some years. Matter of fact, it's interesting to note, when he was 65, they told him to hand in his files, and he said, "What files?" And they had to hire him for 2 more years to put the files down on paper. But at that time, there were many strikes, and things were not easy for people to live. And he had to sell milk. And at one time, he sold soap. He told me that he went to the wealthy neighborhoods and knock on a door and try to sell a bar of soap for $1. And one day he made $7.
Oh.
And it was
Joy.
That was the joy, excuse me. And so the bottom line is many of us of that age have suffered in this sense, that we knew we didn't have for sure tomorrow what would be there. And I
Not
think,
even a mother.
No, not even a mother. But the funny part of it is when we talk about the simple life today, and they have a little problem with some of my age, hoarders probably came out of that era because you better hang on to it, it might be gone.
Every
But
piece of paper.
Every piece of paper. So it's been a struggle to make sure that you didn't get that syndrome.
Were you responsible for all the quote-unquote obediences in the house?
Oh, dear. Yes. My sister Pat would do the wash. I did a lot of the cleaning. And the vacuum and I were very good friends. And
What was your routine vacuuming?
Well, I would push it 3 times, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. And then I'd circle 12 times for the gifts, 7 times for and I would kneel down in between, say Hail Marys and Glory Bees and Decade of the Rosary or whatever. Where did that come from? I don't know. I know that for me, it was probably the result of my father's training. My father went to daily mass, and at 6:30 in the morning, St. Scholastica's, he was off to mass, and he left the radio on. And when this radio program came on, you had to get up. When this one came on, you had to be eating. When this one came on, you better be up getting out the door. If this one came on, you were late. And it's amazing to me, we were never late. But it was not an easy childhood. But
Did your father live to see you as president of Barry?
yes, they were there at my inauguration. My father had promised my mother on her deathbed, because she had never gone past 8th grade. She made him promise that each child would get through college. And he kept his promise. And he never married until the last one graduated. When my sister Mary graduated from nursing, he married within 6 months. And so
What a prince.
he dedicated his life to making sure we got educated. And he really was very, very strict religious. We said the rosary every night. On Sunday, we all went to Mass together. And we went to Saunders for breakfast. He would play the fiddle in the afternoon, and we would sing with him. Matter of fact, that was one thing that paid off in my old age, was the fiddle. Excuse me, just a minute.
Yeah.
I was one time, they teased me about fundraising. Well, this one time I was at dinner, and
Is this at Barry?
this was when I was at Barry, and there was a gentleman in the restaurant who was crying, and there was a band there. If I were honest, I'd have to tell you, I think that was part of the bar.
Oh.
But I was with a group of people, and this gentleman came over to me and he said, "Are you Sister Jeanne?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, I heard that you sang. Is it true?" And I said, "Well, I don't know how true it is, but I try." He said, "Well, my daddy died today, and if you can sing Indian Maid, I'll give you $250,000 for Barry right now." I said, "Oh, thank you, Lord." And so I went to the band leader, and from my kindergarten or youth came this song that my dad had played the fiddle. There once was an Indian maid, a poor little Indian maid. And so from out of nowhere came that song, and I sang it. Matter of fact, I sang 9 verses. I have no idea. I made them up, I'm sure. But he gave the check for $250,000. And so the next day I went to the music store and got that song, framed it and took it over to him. And he gave me $50,000 more after that. But so the fiddle paid off.
The fiddle paid off.
So
oh my.
if they tell you don't fiddle around, maybe you don't need
Maybe
to pay.
maybe you better.
Sometimes it's all right to fiddle. But my dad did fiddle, and he clog danced. And
Obviously, he was an anchor in your life.
yes, he was.
And what did he say about you joining the Adrian Dominican Sisters?
Well, my sister Pat had entered the convent, entered the Adrian Dominicans, and she left after about 15 months. That broke my heart. The greatest thing in my life was my sister was a nun, and God willing, someday I could be one. And when she left, Mother Gerald came over to that little parish, St. Scholastica's, and asked to see my sister, and I went with her. And Mother Gerald said she wanted to know if Pat would want to come back.
Oh.
And Pat did not want to come back.
Mm-hmm.
But Mother Gerald looked at me and said, perhaps you might be the one. So at my sophomore year, I asked Mother Gerald if I could enter, and she said I had to be a prep. But my sister Pat said she can't be a prep. She can't go if she's going to be a prep. And so it turned out that I could enter the postulancy.
At 16.
Yeah, in June of 45.
What school were you in at that time?
Visitation.
Visitation.
Yeah, visitation. And that morning, it was during the war, and my dad had to go to work that day. And he came in to say goodbye to me, and he said, because of my sister, he said, you know, if you want to come home, it's all right. Because he had been pretty disappointed. Mm-hmm. In those days, having nuns in the family was, hot stuff. But
especially Irish families.
But anyway, he said to me, your home now is wherever the Blessed Sacrament is. And, but you can leave if you if you want to. So that was an interesting...
Was Mother Gerald your sponsor then?
No, my Mother Gerald was a friend, really, and at least I was naive enough to think she was a friend, and I did love her. But Sister Helen Jeanne was my sponsor.
Are you saying Ellen or Helen?
Helen.
Helen Jeanne.
Helen
yes.
Jeanne. She was one of the original 4 at St. Scholastica.
Oh.
I was trying to think of, it was Sister Immaculata, how I loved her. And they would take me as their companion. I can remember riding the bus down 6 Mile Road with those nuns. And Sister Helen Jeanne and Sister Marie Gilbert. And the other one, Joanne Marie, came at some time, but I'm not clear on the 4th one. But the nuns were always wonderful to us. Matter of fact, most of my happy memories are associated with the nuns in terms of school and the life of there. But they were very good to us.
Jeanne, may I ask from whom or from whence your gifts of hospitality and compassion and vision, from whom they came?
I think that was family, because my dad used to say, you have to tote. If you see a neighbor with a load, you tote, you carry, you listen, you help. And even in the most humble of homes, anyone who came to the door, put the kettle on. And I always thought that was part of when the door knocked, you went and got the kettle. But I think it's part of the gift of opening one's heart to the world. And it's only when you open your front door and can be kind to neighbor that you open the heart and you are kind to the world. And so the blessing for me, I don't know why that gift of compassion and hospitality or creativity or just plain caring, those kinds of gifts are the surprise of a woman, or the surprise of the gift of life, and the mystery of life and who we are. What a marvelous, marvelous surprise.
Before we go to vision, it seems to me that your focus in your life has been on fighting, what should I say, racism or diverse people who were afraid of diversity. How did that begin, or what brought that about in your life?
Well, that's a little story of how I think I got to be an Adrian Dominican. I was on the streetcar going to Belial down Grand River, and the streetcar had on it, in the side seat, an Afro-American, or what we would call a black lady, with 4 little children. And the streetcar jerked, and 2 of them fell toward me, and I held them. I asked her if I could hold them, and she said yes. A few blocks later, a white man rang the bell to get off and spit on me. And I was a little taken back, and that night I asked my dad. I told my dad what had happened, and I said, "Why did this man spit on me?" My dad said, "Because of prejudice." I said, "What causes prejudice?" My dad said, "Prejudice is because of ignorance." Well, how do you get rid of ignorance? Education. From that time on, never once did I doubt but that I wanted to fight prejudice. And I would do it through education. And of course, because of those nuns that I loved were educators, that was all I wanted. Mm-hmm. All I wanted was to fight prejudice. Mm-hmm. And to embrace those in pain and embrace those who nobody wanted to look at. And I can remember on Sundays going to the old folks' home every Sunday and taking my little sister. And I always chose to sit by the elderly person that was alone or who didn't look.
Is that at our Little Sisters of the Poor near Scholastica's?
Was on the corner. Mm-hmm. And every Sunday I would go. And when I'd come home, we would have dinner, and my dad would ask me who I sat with and those were simple days. But it was always the neglected ones that touched my heart. And I literally would feel the pain when I was even teaching the little guy that nobody liked. That they always thought that kid was my favorite, and probably was. Mm. But
that's what compelled you to help the 300 Haitians that were seeking.
For some reason, when I arrived in the South in Florida, at that time, more people had come through the waters than had come through Ellis Island. And I was drawn to them. And it was a case of being, trying to be a convener, to gather people to respond to the pain. And somehow or other, when the courts called me to see if I would be accepting caring for these immigrants, Sister Marie Carroll and I, oh goodness, the nuns at Barry, we had over 360, I know, paroled to us. But then I had a deal with the INS that they would not lock up children. After that, I learned. And the students used to tease me because we had a wing in the dorm that they called Sister Jeanne's refugee wing. And poor Sister Peg and so many of them, they ended up having to walk the extra mile with people that didn't really, quote, quote, belong to Barry. But believe me, they belonged. They belonged.
How beautiful. And your gift of vision, you told me once that your study of science has helped you in that respect.
Vision is mystery. From within, we have our values. we give voice to the values. And then the voice creates the vision based on the values that come from our inner soul, our inner. And it is in that vision that you get the energy to continue to strive, to go forward, to achieve what must be done during your time, that the world will be just a little bit better, just even a little bit better, because you gave voice to a vision. And that comes from process, not the product. The process of yearning to fulfill your dreams, your vision. And that comes from the Lord, the Spirit. And so you fight prejudice, you tap dance, or you sing, or you caress or hug. And you do it all because that's who you are. And in who you are is who the Lord is.
It's not everyone I know who's had a documentary made of her, but there is one that has been made by to honor the Florida Women of Achievement, and yours is the very first documentary. I look forward to seeing that, but I must bring this to mind. Recently, when Father Theodore Hesburgh died, I remember you telling the story of, I think it was a brilliant idea, inviting him to Barrie. Would you mind?
Ted Hesburgh and I were friends. And when I first got to Barrie, I didn't know where to turn. There were serious problems. And I called Ted and I said, Ted, would you come and spend a little time with me and help me to see what we should be doing? And he came and he spent 3 days. And on the third day we met, and he said to me, you have great possibilities, but you must build a campus. Build. You have to have a significant core to make that statement of what your mission is in this place. And so that's what we did. I spent 23 years trying to achieve a significant campus. And when I started, I think there were 12 buildings. When I left, I know there were 50, but some of them were not new buildings. They were buildings we had purchased or did things to. But I did add 120 acres or something. I bought the racetrack. We bought the racetrack that was behind us. And I guess it's not the growth of Barrie that Ted Hesburgh really modeled for me. It was the significant importance of education in the life of people if we are to fight prejudice, if we are to raise up those people who will know the right and the just thing to do, and to do it with compassion and care. And so the importance of higher education and what it can do is so vital if we don't lose track of its mission.
Well, Jeanne, this has been wonderful, and I thank you for the privilege of interviewing you. And I'd like to speak for all the sisters in the community to thank you for your incredible ministry, not only as a general council person, but as a provincial and most recently as a stellar president of our university in Florida. God bless you.
I would like to thank you, and yes. I would like to thank all of the sisters that have been my sister, that have been my family. And so I don't have to look back to sad days. I look back with joy to joyful days celebrated with women who I've been journeying with for over 70 years.
Especially Georgina and
Georgina and
I want to say
Sally. We traveled all.
Sarah Kavanaugh.
We were the implementers. And somebody had to do that kind of stuff.
After Vatican II.
After the chapter. a lot of wonderful things were said, but they had to be implemented. And so I don't know whether I want to be known as an implementer or a convener. I prefer the convener because that means you bring people together to rejoice in one another and to have a party or two.
Hospitality.
Hospitality.